So a control is a procedure or practice or policy that's put into place and the way you work in order to manage or mitigate a risk that you have. So a control is always there to deal with or to mitigate a risk that you have in your process. So if we're like getting concrete, why do you have code review? Why is code review mandated in a bank? And there's lots of reasons why you could do code review, but for them, the absolute foundational reason you have code review is because you have to mitigate against something called insider threat. Insider threat is a risk, and that risk is that someone inside your organization of your 100,000 employees, or even someone who stole the laptop of one of your 100,000 employees, can use their access and knowledge of internal systems to do something that's not in the interest of the bank. So like a really kind of cartoon example is, what if you were the engineer writing the code to calculate interest payments, and you just shaved off the rounding error into your own personal bank account. You just snuck in a little bit of code, and, you know, little by little, all those rounding errors end up in your account and you become filthy rich. Obviously, that is not an outcome that's in the interest of the bank. It's not in the interest of consumers. It's just generally considered a bad thing. It's a risk. So how do you deal with that risk? Well, you could say, well, we only hire people we trust. And by putting a lot of trust in the system, you're relying on humans to behave in a way that you would hope. That element of trust is not good enough for the risks that are involved in regulated software delivery. So you mandate a control, and that control is that every software change, every source of code change that happens, someone else, at least one person, sometimes more, depending on the risks involved, has to also look at that code and say, yes, we want this change to happen to our source code. So the control is there to manage the risk of insider threat. We do code review for insider threat, and great. So now we've established the link between controls and risks. Now, how do you know that that control is working? How do you know that we say we're doing code review? Code review is in our policy. It's part of our SDLC. And the auditors are going to come and make sure we do the thing we said, that we're doing code review for all those changes. Now, how do you ensure that that is true? Well, you have to go and make sure that at some point in your process, you're either enforcing code review to happen and you're gathering the proof that code review is happening. So like one of the things that's kind of really changed with GitHub and modern version control systems is this concept of a pull request. So the pull request can form as a type of documentation that you have done code review. Now the pull request itself isn't the control. It's just a record that you have performed the control. The control happens to be very human. Human is looking at it, and there's a record. I wrote the code, JC reviewed it, and then it was merged into production. It was merged into the main branch and ended up in production. And then going backwards from that, the auditor will ask you a question, which is maybe thinking with the end in mind, where they'll say, give me a list of all the changes to this system in the last 12 months and prove to me that every change had code review. And that's where you need the evidence. So it could be going around and taking screenshots of spreadsheets. It could be scraping APIs from GitHub to get the list of commits and their associated PRs. But there's some evidence gathering and so on. So that's the next step.